Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the MCU Perspective, Sony Edition. And today we're going to be discussing the fifth film to be released as part of Sony's universe of Marvel characters, aka the Spider-Man superhero universe, Venom, The Last Dance. Now, I know in my last Sony edition of the MCU Perspectives, I promised that I'd be looking at Kraven the Hunter for the next movie, but that film got pushed back all the way to December of this year, so while it will be looked at, it's that day is not this day. So, we're going to be looking at the last film in the Venom trilogy. And yes, it is the last film. It has been confirmed by Tom Hardy that he is not going to be doing any more Venom movies after that, which I think kind of sucks, but then again, there's only so many stories you can tell with someone. Although in the case of Venom, there's literally decades, but hey, there's no Spider-Man that he has to fight with, so who knows. Either way, this was billed as the last Venom movie, which you could probably already tell just by the name of the movie, The Last Dance. This is a film involving the end of this particular version of Venom. And I admit, the film when it was actually advertised was one that did catch my interest. The thing is, while the Sony universe of Marvel characters has kind of been a mixed bag, creatively speaking, the best films that have come out of this franchise, well, the Venom movies. They've been the ones that have been the most consistently good. Not great, and even by regular movie standards, they're still very flawed, but I would still say that I had a good time with all the Venom movies. So when this film was about to hit release, I was interested in seeing it. I was interested in where it was going, and when I heard about certain things that were happening in said movie, I was even more hyped. With that said, does the film itself actually deliver on that hype? Well, let's take a look at it and find out. As today, we'll be looking at the final film in the Venom trilogy, The Last Dance, and just a heads up, 1. I took notes, so there will be times when I potentially open this up and then just, browse right through this notebook to see if I need to find certain notes for certain things that happen in the movie. And likewise, spoilers are inbound. At the time that I'm doing this vlog, the film has only been out in theaters for 2 weeks, so if you haven't seen the movie yet and want to go in unspoiled, turn away now, because I'm spoiling it rotten. Are we good? Alright, so with all that out of the way, let's get to the long-ass plot summary. And the film opens in the void. Well, sort of. We actually open in what looks like this weird alien dark forest, which in the center of it all, we meet, well, kind of our villain of the movie. This ancient Lovecraftian horror by the name of Null. And he is the god of the symbiotes. No, I'm not even joking. Basically, long ago, Null created the entire symbiote race to serve him, but, in his own words, one day light came to the realm and his symbiotes turned on him. They wound up eventually beating Null, and they wound up imprisoning him in this particular place, which is where he is right now, as we see that he is he just seems to be crouched down in what looks like this big, gooey symbiotic chair with just keeping him in place and just kneel down and holding onto what looks like a sword. And, well, that Null has basically stayed here for almost centuries, possibly. However, there is one way for Null to escape, and that thing is something called a codex, which he says there is one now, and he wants it if he wants to escape. And the thing is, Null didn't just create the symbiotes. He also created, well, the symbiote's natural predator. These creatures called the xenophage, which, well, like I said, they are meant to just hunt down symbiotes and kill them. And as such, Null, when learning that there's a codex out in the world, sends the xenophage out to try and get the codex so he can be free, as while he can't actually get out of his prison, it appears that he can at least open portals to send the xenophage out, so, I guess that's a thing. But after Null sends out some of the xenophage monsters, we cut to Earth, specifically Earth in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as we see Eddie Brock in Mexico as he's talking to the bartender. Yeah, this is where we kind of check back in with Eddie during the events of Spider-Man No Way Home, as we see him, chatting it up with the bartender, and the bartender pretty much just finishing up telling Eddie about everything that happened in the MCU involving Thanos, all the superheroes, and all that stuff. Although the scene is edited down so that they only really include the stuff with Thanos. They don't mention anything about the Hulk, they don't mention Spider-Man at all, they don't mention Eddie wanting to go to New York to meet Spider-Man. All that stuff is just kind of cut out as Eddie tries getting up because he's drunk off his ass before the spell that Doctor Strange put in No Way Home activates, and he's sent hurtling back to his universe, specifically right in the vicinity of the same bar that Eddie was in. Basically, it's the It's Eddie's universe's version of the bar, complete with its own version of the same bartender, only in his universe, he has long hair. And apparently Venom is more than happy to be back home, because apparently he's done with this multiverse shit. Yeah, you're not the first one to pull that one out of nowhere, Venom. But basically, to try and cheer Eddie up, Venom takes Eddie behind the bar and ends up mixing him a drink, much to the horror of the bartender, since Venom is using all of his tendrils to do it, and he eventually just walks out because, well, he doesn't need any of that crap. However, as Eddie gets the drink that Venom made him, he ends up looking to the TV and sees that the news is on, and it's about him. So, remember Peter Mulligan from Let There Be Carnage? Yeah, apparently he died. Not really, I'll get to that later. But to the greater public, it looks like this guy, he kicked the bucket and was impaled on a spire. And the one who's taking the blame for his death is Eddie, which means now that a lot more than just regular police are after Eddie. He's now being accused of just straight up murder. As such, Eddie realizes he's kind of fucked now, especially since Venom points out that if that's on the news here in Mexico, then it's on the news everywhere. There's nowhere they can go. But Eddie thinks that he has an idea. As while looking around the bar, he sees hold on one second. Souvenir. I was blanking on the word. It's a little souvenir Statue of Liberty, and Eddie thinks maybe they could go to New York. After all, he used to live in New York, and the only reason he got thrown out was because he dug into places he shouldn't have. And Eddie thinks that that's the key to, getting back in the hot seat. As the judge that initially threw him out of New York, well, he's got a lot of dirt, and Eddie has all that dirt. So if he thinks that he can get back to New York and use said dirt against that judge, maybe he can pull some strings and get the charges against Eddie dropped. As such, Venom and Eddie decide they gotta go on the road to clear Eddie's name. Although before they go, they end up breaking into a warehouse where these guys have a bunch of dogs locked up and are used for dog fighting, and it leads to a genuinely awesome fight scene where we see Venom and Eddie just whooping these guys' asses in a very coordinated style before biting their heads off and freeing the dog. So again, it's cool. However, it's at this point when one of the xenophages arrives and seems to be tracking Eddie, though it seems to stop when Eddie's in his civilian mode. And well, it turns out the xenophage isn't the only one that's hunting Mr. Brock. As it turns out, the government's after him. And you see, when Eddie left the little bar in Mexico, a few security cameras saw him, and their feeds were sent directly to this weird government lab, which I don't remember what the exact institute is called. I'd have to look at my notes. Hold on, let me actually look it up, because I think I did write it. Oh yeah, it's called the Imperium, and well, they have a vested interest in Mr. Brock, or more specifically, they have a vested interest in his symbiote, and as such, once they realize that Eddie was there in Mexico, they end up sending out some of their agents, led by a general named Strickland, to try and get information on him, and as a result, they wind up interviewing the bartender, and then kidnap him because he's seen too much. Sucks to be that guy. However, in the midst of all this, we see that the Imperium has been a little busy, because you see, Officer Peter Mulligan ain't dead yet. So going back to the end of Let There Be Carnage, remember when we actually checked in on Mulligan and we saw that there was something going on with him? Yeah, apparently at that point, Officer Mulligan had gotten a symbiote. It was most likely a cast-off from the Carnage symbiote, but apparently that symbiote ditched Mulligan for reasons I don't understand, and as a result, these agents from the Imperium wound up finding him and essentially arrested him, as he was near death and was not doing well. However, the Imperium has its own little secret. They have symbiotes of their own. As we learn in a later scene in the movie, apparently, aside from the rocket that the Life Foundation sent up into space, another group of symbiotes landed on Earth via an asteroid. And upon landing, well, the agents of the Imperium, led by General Strickland, wound up finding the symbiotes and contained them, bringing them back to their home base in a little place called Area 55. It's like Area 51, but more top secret. And kind of add salt to the wound, Area 51 is actually being decommissioned in the movie, and they are literally destroying everything, burning it up in giant acid showers. It's not fun. It's kind of sad, actually. And it's even gotten in the news, so... Basically, when the agents of the Imperium wound up bringing Officer Mulligan in, they decided to call their head scientist, a woman by the name of Dr. Payne, to, actually talk with him. Because you see, it turns out Officer Mulligan is compatible with one of the symbiotes they have on standby. And upon bringing him into their base at Area 55, they basically just bonded him to one of the symbiotes as he was a compatible host, and it basically just patched him up good as new, but because the greater world thinks he's dead, they have to now keep him locked up there. So, sucks to be him, I guess. However, Dr. Payne is very much interested in talking to Officer Mulligan, because the thing is, Dr. Payne really finds herself invested in the symbiotes. Kind of similar to Carlton Drake, only she's not a complete sociopath. Well, keyword there being not a complete sociopath. And she wants to actually, talk with the symbiotes. And as such, after she's given a call that Mulligan's been brought in, she goes to Area 55, which is located under Area 51 as it's being torn down. And General Strickland and her assistant, who I don't remember her name. I think her assistant only had her name mentioned once, so apologies, I don't genuinely remember it. But they end up going down to Area 55, and they do end up talking to Officer Mulligan, who is clearly still not doing well, as he and his symbiote are still trying to figure out the ins and outs of their new relationship. Mulligan, of course, is not exactly happy with what he is, as he's still mumbling about monsters like he was at the end of Let There Be Carnage, and his symbiote is still kind of acclimating to his new form, especially since Mulligan has his hearing aid, which is picking up subsonic noises which are hurting the symbiote. However, Mulligan has at least established enough of a bond with his symbiote that it ends up talking to him, and so he is able to start relaying information from the symbiote, and he explains why this particular band of symbiotes came to Earth. As the thing is, while Riot's crew of symbiotes had come to Earth explicitly for the sake of conquering it, apparently these symbiotes want safe haven, I guess? I don't really get it, and I'll get to my thoughts on that after I do the plot summary, but point is, they came here because they were apparently running from Null, and they know that his return is imminent, and, well, they basically, Mulligan's symbiote tries warning everyone, but it does it in the most threatening way possible, and not helped by the fact that we actually see a vision of what could happen if Null ever gets freed, so nice on that one. But basically, as all this is going on, we cut back to Eddie and Venom as Venom decides that if they're going to New York, they may as well take a more direct route, so they end up sneaking onto a plane. Quite literally, as we see this plane as it's flying through the air, and we see Eddie holding on to the side of the plane using symbiote goo. And what I love is that the whole reason this is even happening is because Eddie insulted Venom and said he was the only superhero that couldn't fly. So Venom decided to just take this method as a way. I'm screwing with Eddie. Sorry, popcorn digesting. However, Eddie is complaining about it the whole way, which I think anyone would be. He's flying out in the middle of nowhere, and it's just not, and he's facing a lot of gale force winds right there. But ultimately, to try and shut Eddie up, Venom essentially suits him up so that Venom can take the brunt of it. However, upon doing this, we see the xenophage back in Mexico, as apparently it actually zeroes in on where Venom is, and we see how everything looks from its perspective. Its vision is partially limited, but it does seem to be able to sense where things are. And when it senses Venom, we see that there is that from the xenophage's perspective, there's this weird orange thing pulsing on the base of Venom's neck. And, well, that's the thing the xenophage wants, as it literally jumps miles upon miles into the air and lands right on the plane. And the instant Venom sees this thing, he freaks the fuck out. And as such, he tries avoiding it, and eventually they manage to throw the xenophage into one of the turbines for the plane. But at this point, Venom actually recedes back into Eddie because Venom says they're in some deep shit. And, well, the end result of this is that Eddie ends up falling right off the plane, but thankfully Venom saves him by turning into a makeshift parachute. So, Eddie's fine, although the xenophage is sadly not out for the count, as while its remains do fall to the ground below, they end up literally starts patching itself back together, and is ultimately no worse for wear. So, that monster is still around. But either way, once Venom and Eddie are back on the ground, Venom seems to be a bit more skittish, as he keeps popping out of Eddie and keeps looking around as if something's watching him. As such, Eddie kind of wants to know what the hell is going on. As such, Venom goes on to explain what the xenophage is, that that's a symbiote hunter, it's there for Eddie, there for Eddie and Venom, and, well, and basically, of course, Eddie wants to know why they're being targeted in particular, and it's because that codex that Null mentioned, Venom has it. or more specifically, Venom and Eddie. And it's here where Venom sort of explains what a codex is. Basically, if a symbiote's host ends up dying, a symbiote can use its own natural healing prowess to, bring them back to life. The thing is, I think in the comics, and again, I think, don't quote me on this, I haven't read the Venom comics a lot, I think the idea is that a codex is quite literally all the genetic information that a symbiote stores up from all the hosts they've had over the millennia. And so, using that codex, a symbiote can revive a previous host. And through that genetic memory, Venom can bring anyone back, including Eddie. But the thing is, once he does that, the codex is given form inside their body, and as it becomes a mixture of both of their life forces, and it exists as long as the symbiote and the host it brought back are bonded together. And the thing is, Eddie did die once. So you remember back in Venom when Riot stabbed Eddie through the chest with that giant Buster sword, and then Venom had to come in, rebond with Eddie, and heal him back up? Yeah, apparently by doing that, Venom created a codex, which, like I said, exists as long as Eddie and Venom exist, as it's a mixture of both of their life forces. And all Null needs to do to get free of his prison is to acquire their codex, as it can be used as a key to unlock his prison. And, well, yeah, the instant Venom mentions Null, what I kind of love is that when Venom mentions Null, he actually forbids Eddie from actually speaking about it. But on top of that, Venom also lets Eddie know that he can't be full-suited right now. The thing is, while Eddie and Venom do have the codex, as long as they're both alive, the codex is only detectable when a symbiote or when Venom is in his true form, i.e. when he suits up, so to speak. So while Venom can pop his head out of Eddie's body and create tendrils and other appendages for him, if he suits up while he is bonded with Eddie, then the xenophage can track him and it will come for the codex. And unfortunately, the only way for the codex to be destroyed is if either Eddie or Venom is killed. So yeah, neither is really okay with that. As such, sorry, that was my echo right there. As such, while Eddie and Venom both decide that Eddie and Venom obviously don't want to die, they decide to keep going with their road trip to New York because, yeah, they still have a life to live, and, well, while this whole thing with the xenophage is not going to be helpful to them, again, they kind of need, at best, this is just an obstacle for them, so they just kind of need to adapt and move on, which is, again, easier said than done, because Eddie really doesn't have anything to his name, not money and barely any clothes, and he keeps losing shoes for whatever reason. But, either way, Eddie and Venom continue making their way to New York, and to try and speed up the process, they end up coming across a farm, and basically Venom ends up bonding to a horse, basically supercharging the thing and giving him and Eddie some greater speed as Venom's ability to boost his host's natural abilities allows the horse to move super fast, which again is kind of awesome. And Eddie's in pure and utter hell as it's going on. However, it turns out that Area 55 actually caught wind of Eddie's little just diving stunt from the plane, and so they're able to use eyewitness testimony to narrow down where Eddie is, and General Strickland ends up sending some of his people to try and, pick Eddie up. As such, as Eddie and Venom end up stopping by a river so that the Venom horse can get something to drink, well, that's when the agents of Area 55 come in. Hold on one second. Apologies, thought I was needed. But yeah, that's when the agents of Area 55 come in, and it turns out that them studying those symbiotes that came crashing down it's allowed them to study their weaknesses too, as they end up hitting the horse with a sonic blaster that ends up separating Venom from, the horse, and, their orders are to get Venom. Eddie, not so much. As such, it leads to a battle as Eddie ends up falling into the river, and the agents actually go after him. And with Venom immediately escaping from his binds to try and catch up to Eddie. And it's again easier said than done, as the agents are on both Eddie and Venom like flies on crap. And while Venom is able to elude it somewhat, as he's able to bond to various animals and so forth to try and get closer and closer to Eddie, again, Eddie is not doing so well either, as at this point he's depowered and he's going one-on-one with one of the soldiers. And that particular struggle ends with him accidentally shooting the soldier with her own gun. And it's actually a rather fucked up scene because we see the both of them struggling in the river underwater, Eddie doing his best to try and fight off the soldier, who's clearly a superior opponent, and then when the soldier pulls out her gun, Eddie has to struggle before he finally gets it pointed at her head, and she ends up pulling the trigger, and he looks into her eyes as she dies. As in the struggle, he got, like, her face mask off, and it's really fucked up, honestly. But unfortunately, there are other soldiers besides her, and so as Eddie is about to head over a waterfall, Venom finally catches up to him and rebonds with him, basically fully suiting up just so that Eddie can have a chance of falling over. Though unfortunately, doing this does attract the xenophage, and as a result, while Eddie is able to get away from the soldiers, well, the xenophage ends up zeroing in on the location, and while again, Venom is able to hide his and Eddie's location by streaking back into him and only doing like a partial transformation, the soldiers are not so lucky, because all of them see this giant monstrosity with sharp teeth, and their response is, "What the absolute fuck is that thing?" And they start opening fire on it. And it's here we see more how the xenophage operates, because apparently how they kill their prey, they stuff them into their mouth, and they are literally shredded into dust. I'm not even kidding. There are fins on the back of the xenophage's head which end up filtering out the remains like it's a viscous mist or whatever. It's honestly very fucked up. And unfortunately, a good chunk of General Strickland's people end up dying to this thing. Again, excuse me. Apologies, dog-related stuff. In fact, my dog is here right now. She's adorable. Anyway, going back to the movie. So, after the xenophage basically has its fill with General Strickland's men, it ends up just essentially fucking off to parts unknown since it essentially lost its prey. And General Strickland is quite a bit shaken up by this thing, as he ends up calling back to Area 55 and Dr. Payne about the xenophage's presence, and how it basically just literally shredded his men to bits. Meanwhile, Dr. Payne is wondering if he got any samples, which results in General Strickland being rightly pissed about the inhumanity of what she just said. Like, lady, I understand you're a scientist and and your whole ideal is to study these alien life forms and so forth, but, where does humanity come in, bitch? Yeah, I'll get back to that when I get to my thoughts on the movie, but basically, General Strickland ends up storming back to base, and he practically bursts the door and he practically kicks the door down as he enters the holding cells where Officer Mulligan is, and he wants to know what the hell is going on, even foregoing any of the decontamination stuff that they do. Yeah, I didn't mention that before because I didn't feel it was relevant, but like I said, he just foregoes it. As such, Dr. Payne, and Payne's assistant, again, sorry I don't remember her name, finally end up questioning Mulligan again because they want more specifics about what the hell he's talking about, since he did mention this stuff about the void and the monsters and whatever. And as a result, they end up finally directly talking to Mulligan's symbiote. And just gonna say this right now, for any who have read the comics, no, Officer Mulligan is not Toxin. I don't know why they decided to not make him Toxin in this movie. They just didn't. Instead, he's bonded to some other random-ass symbiote, which, I'll admit, does look kind of cool. It's basically the symbiote's like this when it actually goes when it fully comes out in its true form. It looks almost twisted, almost beautiful in a twisted way, as it just kind of flows around its cell. Instead of having legs, it's got like a tail, it's got multiple arms, and the way it talks is just so smooth and quiet and calm. It's actually pretty darn cool, and I do dig it, although I still would have preferred Toxin, but hey, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. I'll get to my thoughts on that later. But either way, this thing is finally questioned about what it means, and it further talks about how Null is looking for the Codex, and that, well, if Null gets free from his prison, he will kill everything. Not just a planet, he will kill everything. Every life form in the universe will be his for the taking, and basically, the symbiotes don't want him to get out. Again, excuse me a second. Again, apologies. But like I said, the symbiotes don't want him getting out, and the Mulligan symbiote pretty much just tells everyone that the Codex is located within Eddie, and that it's tied to Eddie and Venom's life force. That as long as they're together, the Codex will exist. And if they want the Codex gone, then either Eddie or Venom has to die. And of course, General Strickland is more than happy to kill one or the other because because Eddie killed one of his men. He just saw one of Null's henchmen, so to speak, shred a few of his other men, and he has just been told that if the god of these people ends up getting out, he will fucking kill everyone. What I'm saying is, the angry general probably has every right to be angry at this point. However, Dr. Payne, in her infinite wisdom, thinks that it's wrong to try and kill Eddie or Venom. That they need to be studied. That science requires sacrifice, and yeah, General Strickland rightfully throws that back in her face. Even her assistant ends up calling her out and saying that this is fucking dangerous, as her assistant is shaken up by the news to the point where after she leaves the holding cell, she ends up seeing another one of the scientists at Area 55 and just kind of asks her, have you talked to your family recently? Because she's clearly very afraid right now, and it's actually, I gotta give credit where it's due. It works. It works. Meanwhile, back with Eddie and Venom, we see that they're still going on their way to New York, though Eddie is a little still shaken up about the fact that he had to kill a soldier just to survive. But he doesn't get enough time to mull on that, as he and Venom thankfully end up getting a ride with a road tripping family. The head of this family is a guy named Martin who used to work in IT, and basically, he's basically an alien hunter. He heard over the news that Area 51 is being decommissioned, and so he and his wife cashed out their family's life savings, bought a van, and so he, his wife, his 2 kids, and their dog are now traveling cross country to hopefully see Area 51 before it's completely destroyed. And, well, they stopped in this little valley, and they happened to run into Eddie. As such, they welcome him in, give him some food, which Venom probably throws away because there's absolutely no meat in it, and Eddie lets them know that he's on his way to New York. And while they say they can't bring him to New York as it's too far out of the way, they can at least drop him off in Las Vegas. As such, Eddie ends up joining Martin and his family, and we get a admittedly kind of distracting scene as we see Eddie just sitting in the car with Martin and his family as they're singing the Major Tom song, and it's a good song. And while Venom is happily singing along, Eddie's just kind of suffering in silence as he hates every second of it. But what I do like about the scene is that part of the reason why Venom is liking this so much is because it's clear that he wouldn't, as he even tells Eddie, he wouldn't mind living a life like this with Eddie, just settling down, having a family, just kind of goofing off. It's actually kind of nice, and I like it. And what makes it even better is that once everyone's done singing and they're still on the road, most of the passengers in the van, aside from the driver, Martin's wife, are just sound asleep, but Martin's son ends up waking up, and he and Eddie get to talking, and Martin's son reveals that he's kind of afraid to reach Area 51, because he believes that if they get there and they do find aliens, they're going to be not so friendly, somewhat monstrous. And so, Eddie tries comforting Martin's son by just saying, there's no such thing as aliens. Eddie to tell him that they'll be fine, that he'll probably be fine. And in the conversation, Martin's son ends up giving Eddie a chocolate bar. And even Venom, when he sees Eddie talking with him, rather than chastising him and saying, you lied to him about aliens, he instead says, you said the right thing there, Eddie. I think you would have made a good dad. It's, again, a really nice scene, and I dig it. But the Martins do end up keeping their end of the bargain, as they end up getting into Las Vegas and they do drop Eddie off, with Eddie trying to say goodbye, but Martin telling Eddie that it's not goodbye, it's just goodbye for now. As such, they part ways on good terms, and Venom has Eddie eat the chocolate because Venom fucking loves chocolate, but unfortunately, Area 55 it catches wind to Eddie being in Las Vegas, because Las Vegas has security cameras too, and so Officer Strickland authorizes a team called the Six to go and get Eddie. But before he does this, he ends up calling the people in charge of Area 55, and he basically tells them that before he does anything, he wants to be put in charge of the Imperium. Why? Because, well, it's clear Dr. Payne is off her rocker, and, well, General Strickland genuinely believes that the symbiote story about, coming to Earth because they were looking for a safe haven to get away from Null and all that stuff, he thinks it's a load of crock, which I don't blame him, considering that the last batch of symbiotes that came to Earth came here with a clear intent to invade and take control of the population for sustenance, but because Dr. Payne is so enraptured by alien life, she's not really listening, and as a result, Strickland, combined with everything that General Strickland learned about Null and his impending arrival if he should get his hands on the codex Venom and Eddie have, well, let's just say that let's just say that General Strickland thinks he'd be better off in charge, and his superiors agree as they allow him control of the Imperium. Either way, back in Las Vegas, Eddie and Venom, now armed with some cash that Martin gave them, decide that they need to get a car if they want to get to New York. Eddie believes that they can just steal a car, but Venom thinks that if they can just cash in their money and earn big, then they'll be able to get a fancy car and go to New York in style. As such, they end up trying to go into a casino, and after knocking out the bouncer and then mugging a guy to get his suit, they end up going inside and they gamble all of their money away. Well, Venom does, but yeah, they're very much flat broke. However, in the midst of all this, it turns out that in the casino is a familiar face. Mrs. Chen, who's in Las Vegas on her own vacation and who herself is actually winning big. As such, Eddie goes to talk with Mrs. Chen. They hug each other. Mrs. Chen is happy to see him, and she's even happier to know that Venom is still inside Eddie. And as such, she offers them to come to her suite, as because she's such a high roller, she was given one of the best apartments in this casino. And she offers Eddie to clean up, since the guy that Eddie mugged to get the suit pissed on his feet. And she says that Eddie can go in, clean himself up, and then maybe they could party. As such, not really having any other options, Eddie ends up going with Mrs. Chen to her suite, where he does clean up, but Mrs. Chen still wants to dance. Specifically, she wants to dance with Venom. And while Eddie still wants to go on the run because he's still a wanted fugitive, Venom wants to dance, with him even bargaining the fact that Eddie threw out his chickens in the second movie. As such, Eddie concedes to this, and Venom fully suits up as he and Mrs. Chen start dancing, and it's admittedly a kind of rather dumb scene, and what makes it worse is the fact that, like I said, Venom is in his full suit mode right now, which, attracts the fucking xenophage. And yeah, sure enough, in the middle of the dance, the xenophage arrives and breaks into the apartment, but thankfully Venom recedes back into Eddie before he can do any major damage. But also, unfortunately, that's when the Six arrive, and they end up apprehending Eddie and Venom, hitting Eddie with a sonic device to separate Venom from him, and ultimately the pair end up getting captured and taken away. On which also, unfortunately, goes a bit more awry, because the xenophage saw this little encounter and ends up following the Imperium soldiers back to their home base at Area 55. So, good on you. Either way, Eddie himself wakes up in a prison cell that's right across from Officer Mulligan's, which that's when he sees Officer Mulligan has his own symbiote, but Officer Mulligan's symbiote, who I'm just going to call Not Toxin, ends up telling Eddie that there is an army of symbiotes just waiting in this base for him. All he has to do is free them, and they will help him protect the Codex. In the meantime, the Venom himself is essentially locked away with all the other symbiotes in the base, though Dr. Payne's assistant does end up going down to where all the symbiotes are kept and does go to see Venom. However, and as this all goes on and Dr. Payne goes to see Eddie because she wants to talk with him about Venom, well, that's when General Strickland enters back into the fray, as he and a bunch of soldiers come into the holding cells and let Dr. Payne know that she is relieved of duty and that he's now in charge. As well, he's deciding that if Dr. Payne isn't going to do what's necessary, then he will. As he has his officers bring Eddie out of his cell, and he personally pulls a rifle on Eddie with the intent to shoot him, since after all, like Mulligan said, if Eddie or Venom die, then the Codex can't be completed. And well, Eddie did kill one of his soldiers, so this is kind of payback. However, something I forgot to mention is that as Dr. Payne was interviewing Eddie, her assistant came with her, and it turns out when her assistant went to go see Venom, he wound up bonding with her, and, well, Venom, upon seeing his best friend getting shot in the chest, ends up coming out and rebonds with Eddie, healing the wounds, and basically full suiting out, which causes the xenophage to literally burst into the base and start wrecking everyone's shit. Thankfully, Not Toxin ends up breaking out of his cell and tries fighting the creature off, even warning Venom to get out of there and protect the Codex. And from there, well, absolute carnage goes through, as unfortunately, Not Toxin gets shredded. Bye, Mulligan. And as a result, the xenophage ends up chasing Venom and all the soldiers into this main scientific area as it begins just wrecking everything trying to find Venom. And while Venom is able to throw it off somewhat by receding back into Eddie, this thing knows that its target is here and it's going to kill as many people as it has to before it can get to him. As such, with their backs quite literally against the wall, well, that's when the scientists will decide that they need all the help they can get, and they release all the symbiotes. And I won't lie, this is fucking awesome. As all the symbiotes are released from their cells, and they all just jump to anyone they can find, soldiers, scientists, anybody, they just bond with them and just go full monster, and they all look fucking awesome. And all of them have these different and unique abilities. There's one that can turn his hands into like giant cinder blocks. There's two symbiotes that are obviously like a pair that merge together into one giant symbiote, like in the first movie when Venom and Riot wound up fusing temporarily at one time. There's one that seems to be made of fucking fire and magma, for crying out loud. There's a green one that ends up bonding with Dr. Payne's assistant, and this one like Carnage can form weapons and tendrils out of her body. It's fucking awesome, and all of the symbiotes just gang up on the xenophage as the two that merge, trying to tying it up with tendrils as any that have weapons try burning it, slicing at it, and just keep trying to wreck its shit. While Eddie has to try and just hobble out of the area as quickly as possible. But it's still easier said than done because, again, this is a group of symbiotes going up against a symbiote hunter. This thing is starting to overpower them. As such, realizing that they need to get out of there, Venom ends up calling all the symbiotes to him, and they end up just merging into this giant drill that ends up drilling right out of the base and right into Area 51 above. Unfortunately, though, there are innocent bystanders in the fray. So going back to Martin, he and his family did eventually get to Area 51, saw the place, and because they're stupid, they decide to break into this classified government facility through a hole in a wire fence. Yeah, I don't give a shit that this place is being decommissioned. You don't let something like that happen. This is still a government base where there are probably a lot of big government secrets going around. Yes, I know it's being destroyed, but the buildings are still clearly up, so just maybe, you should have higher security. Just saying. But unfortunately, Martin and his family end up climbing onto a comms tower to get a better view, and unfortunately, they end up bearing witness as the symbiotes end up drilling their way out of the ground with the xenophage chasing after. It's not pretty, and as a result, the battle ends up going to them. And throughout it all, Martin and his family end up seeing all the symbiotes and Eddie as they're trying to fight the xenophage off. But unfortunately, the xenophage is getting an upper hand. As we see one of the xenophage's natural abilities to combat symbiotes in play, as it uses basically a sonic echolocation location maneuver to not only temporarily debond all symbiotes from their hosts, but also send a call straight to the void that Null is trapped in, as Null sends even more xenophage to help this particular one, meaning reinforcements are arriving and they're not happy, and basically the battle is just not going well. While Venom is able to talk with Martin and his family and even saves them as they're trapped on a comms tower that sadly gets blown up, while the xenophage is just not going down without a fight. As at one point, General Strickland pulls a rocket launcher on it and tries blowing it up, which Also subsequently kills one of the symbiotes, including its host, which, yeah, that's what results in General Strickland realizing these guys are genuinely trying to help them. But even then, the Xenophage gets back up. Dr. Payne comes out and tries running this thing over with a truck, which does allow her to get into proper position to help Martin and his family. But again, the Xenophage gets back up, and that's when it calls for backup. So things are going grim as the symbiotes are doing their best to try and fight this thing off. And they're failing badly. They can put up a decent fight, but all this thing has to do is just grab a symbiote, and it literally just fillets and kill. It just literally fillets them with its rows and rows of sharp teeth, meaning that they're pretty much fucked in every sense of the word. And as a result, Eddie realizes that in order to try and save the remaining symbiotes and the people they're bonded to, he needs to lure the xenophages away. As such, he ends up grabbing a motorcycle, and he manages to get to General Strickland and pretty much just tells him, look, I'm gonna get them to follow me, get a chopper ready in position. And so General Strickland, realizing that at this point petty grudges mean jack shit, he ends up ordering his men to follow Eddie as he gets on his motorcycle and fully suits out so that the xenophages end up chasing after him. And eventually he does manage to get them into a position where General Strickland's men try shooting at them with a rocket launcher, but it still doesn't kill the xenophages. They just get back up. They even end up knocking the chopper down, and even then taking one soldier whose last name is Thompson. Yes, it is that Thompson. And it ends up chewing up his legs. So, well, hey, there's a potential Agent Venom movie right there. But even through all this, Venom and Eddie try and fight off the xenophage, and with the help of the assistant and her symbiote, they are able to chop off one xenophage's head and tendrils to keep it from hurting people. But again, these things are still coming. And through all the battle, basically Eddie and Venom Eddie starts getting actually really hurt, especially thanks to the xenophage, as one of the xenophage even manages to grab him and almost shreds him, and the only reason he doesn't die is because Martin ran back onto the scene and shot the thing with a rocket launcher. So, that at least good on him, I guess. But yeah, it's clear the battle is turning grim. Not helped by the fact that at one point the assistant does get separated from her symbiote, and the symbiote ends up getting killed by one of the xenophage. And as such, Venom is able to drag Eddie away and get him to the remains of a chopper so that he can heal his wounds. But it's clear the xenophage are going to win this battle. Anything that gets thrown at them, they heal from. They can kill anyone very easily, and they're not going to stop till they get the codex from Venom and Eddie. And as such, the writing is kind of on the wall, as Venom and Eddie quickly realize that the only way that they can end this is if the codex goes. And as such, Venom and Eddie do share one final moment together, with Venom even admitting that he kind of wished that he had seen Lady Liberty. But both Eddie and Venom sort of resign themselves to their fate as they realize they have to do this for the greater good of everybody else. And so they end up climbing out of the remains of the chopper as the xenophage are just searching around for Eddie and co. And Eddie fully suits up just to get their attention. And once the xenophage try jumping at him, the symbiote Venom immediately just grabs all of them and pulls them into its symbiote goo. Basically, Venom bonds with the xenophage, and it's clear that the bonding process isn't exactly well, as they're actively fighting inside of Venom, but Venom has them tight, and he has a target in mind, because you see, how Eddie and Venom are going to end this? They're going to melt them. So remember those acid bats that Area 51 was using to destroy some of their equipment? There is one on standby, and what Eddie and Venom plan to do is that they plan to walk right into the middle of it and activate it. Basically dousing all of them in acid rain and pretty much just completely dissolving Eddie, Venom, and all the xenophage. Basically ending the threat of these monsters and ensuring that Null cannot get his hands on the codex. However, as Venom and Eddie are crawling into the vat, are getting into position, Venom decides that only one of them has to go, as he just ejects Eddie right out from their giant biomass, with Venom now basically playing host to all the xenophages that are still actively fighting back. And, Eddie doesn't want to live while his friend dies, but Venom wants him to continue living. And as such, with the help of General Strickland, who is heavily injured due to fighting one of the xenophage, he ends up managing to activate General Strickland managed to activate the acid shower because it's responds to his both to his handprint and his eyes, and he ends up dousing Venom in this entire acid bath, and Venom even continues using him to activate it because, well, he's still injured and he can barely stand up. But Venom, through all this, is basically just giving his final goodbyes to Eddie, and even tells him that it's only goodbye for now. But ultimately, to try and protect Eddie, Venom ends up using one of his tendrils to put a blast shield over him. Sorry, Chindy's jumping on the bed. Hold on a sec. And, sorry again, Chindy. But like I said, after Venom puts a blast shield over Eddie, he basically just shakes his body and ends up banging right into the pipes that are feeding acid into this machine, and it basically just causes it all to start pouring out right onto Venom, though it also starts spurting out into the surrounding areas, hence why the blast shield was necessary, even getting General Strickland. But General Strickland realizes that he's dying, and he's going down, he's taking these monsters with him, and so, as he lies on the ground in pain, both from the acid and the stab wound he got from a xenophage earlier, he pulls out a grenade and pulls the pin. And the explosion, combined with a vat of acid, causes a massive explosion, which begins encompassing Area 51. I guess there was a lot of explosives. Which also leads to this, honestly, pretty darn cool scene as we see that Dr. Payne So you see Dr. Payne and her assistant trying to leave the area, and Dr. Payne, who had grabbed another one of the symbiotes that was in a small vial, realizes that she needs its extra power to get out of here as she crushes the vial, allows the symbiote to bond with her, and apparently this one has lightning powers. As it manages to use its lightning power, as now in her full suit form, Dr. Payne ends up grabbing her assistant and just super speeds right out of there, right out of Area 51. It's actually kind of awesome, and I dig it. But, yeah, with that... Well, the xenophage are destroyed, but unfortunately it's at a price, as now Venom is dead. And well, it's very heavily implied that he is not coming back. And as such, thanks to the blast shield that Venom put over Eddie, Eddie is fine. He's still alive, shaken up, but overall in one piece. And in the remains of Area 51, the government does come in and they do find Eddie, and they end up putting him into medical care. And thus, when Eddie wakes up, he's met with a general who basically just lets Eddie know that for his service and protecting the world, he basically has been given a clean slate. Everything that he's been accused of has been wiped clean, and now Eddie can go out to live a fresh life. Though he is basically told with absolutely no sense. It basically just threatened, as the general just tells him that if he breathes a word of what happened to anyone, he'll live the rest of his life in a hole. So yeah, that's not fun. But unfortunately, Eddie has to go through this life without his best friend, and so after Eddie is released from medical care, he finally goes through with what he wanted to do, as he manages to reach New York. And the last thing we see in the movie is him looking at Lady Liberty well, basically just promising Venom that he'll never forget him. It's actually a pretty nice scene, as it also has flashbacks to the other movies where we see Eddie and Venom just talking and bonding and all that stuff, and it's accompanied to the song Memories, and it's actually pretty nice and sweet. So again, I like that. But as the film ends, we do have some after credits scenes. The first of which is actually during the credits, and it basically focuses in on Null. You see, the thing is, part of his little symbiotic prison is that he's supposed to be asleep, and the Codex was supposed to be able to wake him up. Thing is, though, all this stuff with the xenophage, he was able to do all of this while he was still sleeping in prison. And unfortunately, the events of the movie have woken him up. So while he's not free, he is aware that Earth's protector, i.e. Venom, has been killed. And while he may not be able to have the means to get out now, he promises that he will. And when he does, he will wreck everyone's shit, and we'll all unfortunately just have to sit back and watch it happen. So, yeah. That's not fun, and I'll admit it actually is pretty creepy. But the true post-credit scene arrives as we actually cut back to Area 51, And we see that in the midst of all the chaos of the xenophage, the bartender from Mexico actually managed to get out, and, well, he comes across what's left of Area 51 as he begins calling for help, and all that's left there are cockroaches. So, yeah. Sucks to be that guy, but he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, so what can you do? But, yeah, that was Venom: The Last Dance, and my thoughts on it? I think it's a good movie. I admit, when I first saw this movie a couple weeks ago, I did not have a strong. My opinion of it wasn't as positive as it is now. I admit I liked it when I first saw it, but I saw more of the flaws the first time I saw it. But while I still do see some of those flaws upon a second viewing, I can openly admit my opinion of it has softened, and I do still find this to be just as enjoyable a movie as the first two Venom movies. With that said, it's still not a perfect movie either. If you wanted me to say if you asked me if this film was the best send off that they could give to Venom, I would say, kinda, maybe, not really. It's one of those. It feels like that they could have given Venom a much stronger send off. But for what we have, it's perfectly fine. So, I say take it for what it's worth. But exactly what about the movie doesn't exactly agree with me? Well, first thing that really got some of my case, the missed opportunities. I'm just gonna say right now, there are a few things in this movie that I feel like had potential to help elevate this movie into something greater, and unfortunately, I think they were squandered. To give one example, let's talk about Peter Mulligan. Like I said, in the comics, he was supposed to play he was the original host to a symbiote called Toxin. And much like how Carnage was the spawn of the Venom symbiote, Toxin was the spawn of the Carnage symbiote, effectively making Toxin Venom's grandson. And the thing is, unlike Carnage, Toxin was more akin to an anti-hero, as Officer Mulligan was a good person, and when he realized he was bonded to the symbiote, as it was given to him for safekeeping, and it just officially bonded to him altogether, he wanted to try and use it for the greater good, to help people. And as a result, Toxin actually had two forms when Officer Mulligan. One was like a proper suit form that kind of made Mulligan look kind of like a red and black version of the black suit Spider-Man without the symbol, and a monster version, which kind of made him more closely resemble Venom and Carnage. And I kind of would have liked to have seen that in film. And at the end of Let There Be Carnage, it seemed to be hinting that in this film we'd be seeing Toxin. And yet we don't. Apparently, Toxin just fucked off and left Mulligan to die, so now we see him just bonded with some other random-ass symbiote, which I find disappointing, quite frankly. And it makes it worse is that Officer Mulligan, despite being a carryover from the last movie, all he really exists for in this movie is exposition. He really just exists here to explain to the Imperium in Area 55, oh, there's this big, omnipresent monster in the void that created us, and that he's after Venom because he has the Codex and all that stuff. And I'll give credit where it's due. Upon a rewatch, I actually did kind of appreciate the look of Officer Mulligan's new symbiote. Like I said, in a way, it looks sort of beautiful. The way it moves, the way it sounds, the way it talks. It does look really damn cool. The problem is that if you're a fan of the comics and you saw Peter Mulligan and saw that hint at the end of the last movie of him having a symbiote, well, guess what? You're not getting payoff. There is no Toxin in this movie, and with the way that he goes out, I doubt there ever will be a Toxin. And if there is, its odds are it's just going to be the symbiote finding a different host. So, if you're a Toxin fan, I guess you gotta wait a while before he appears in a movie. And to kind of even pour more salt on the wound, the way he goes out sucks ass. Like I said, the only thing that Peter Mulligan does in this movie is give exposition to the military about Null and the importance of the Codex in relation. After that, the only time we see him in action is when the Xenophage attacks Area 55, and he gets shredded with barely a fight. It sucks. It feels like wasted and squandered potential. Like they were building something up for a future movie, but then had absolutely no idea what to do, so they just said fuck it and went in a direction that feels like it kind of flies in the face of what they wanted to do. So to that I say, that kind of sucks. And then they give it another example. Going back to the scene where Eddie wound up shooting the soldier in the head when he and Venom were briefly debonded, the scene is a very dark and kind of effed up scene. The thing is, while Eddie has killed people in the past while he's been bonded with Venom, that was never a sense of But that in those kind of cases, he never really was the one doing the killing. It was typically Venom doing the job, and you could argue that in those instances, because Venom was mostly the one in the driver's seat, he was very much disconnected. And usually in those instances, it was partially just for survival, like when he bit off that one robber's head, or when he killed Riot and so forth. But here's the thing. Eddie, what makes this death different is that Eddie had to look into a person's eyes as they died, and he has to know it was his fault. Now Venom tries to justify it to Eddie as it was either you or them, and you had to choose you, which I agree. But that's still a very screwed up moment that I think nobody could just come back from. And yet they just write it off and do jack all with it. I don't know, it just feels like that could have been a big character moment for Eddie that could have helped put a wedge between him and Venom that by the end they would overcome. But yet its only real importance is like one scene later where Eddie is upset that he had to kill someone to survive, and then comes back later when General Strickland says he's using that as a baseline to get to basically shoot Eddie It's doesn't really feel like it just feels like it really didn't need to be there. And then sadly another thing that kind of comes to mind for me in terms of wasted potential is sadly Null. Now I admit, upon a second viewing, I think I do appreciate Null in this movie more than when I first saw the movie, because I'll give credit where it's due. The guy's fucking creepy. While he doesn't do a lot in the movie, they really get a sense that Null is this almost inhuman monster. The way that all the symbiotes talk about him is just with abject fear and horror. Venom is afraid to say his name out loud. That's how scared he is of him. And when we actually see him in the void, like I said, throughout the majority of the movie, he's asleep, and yet he uses what limited power he has to send out these monsters to go after Venom and Eddie just to get his hands on the codex that will eventually free him. And honestly, it does kind of help to create a sense of what he is. One scene that I think really helped nail just how threatening this guy was when Officer Mulligan was first bonded with the not toxin symbiote, and the symbiote was telling Mulligan about what kind of a threat Null was, and we even saw a vision of what could happen if Null was ever freed, and it's just fire and destruction, and basically through Mulligan the symbiote ends up just roaring out, "The darkness has teeth," and it's just kind of terrifying. And I admit, when I saw that scene again in the theater, I was like, oh, this looks big. It actually they create a sense of dread when it comes to Null. And I even admit, by the end of the movie, when Null actually wakes up and promises that he will get out of his prison and fuck up everybody's day, it is effective, and he looks creepy. His face looks almost like just nothing but skin and bones with sharp teeth, almost gangly white hair dripping off of him, and it does the job. It does genuinely work. Combine that with his honestly creepy design, the creepy design of his prison, and you really get a sense that this is not a person. This is a creature, a monster in the purest sense, who only exists to cause pain, death, and destruction, and he's got more than enough power to do it. And I do like that. The problem is that they build up Null like crazy, and yet there's really no confrontation. Despite the fact that Null basically acts as the villain for the movie, well, there's no time we ever see like Venom and Eddie ever actually meet Null. He's always in the background, not really doing anything, and basically it kind of makes him feel lesser, if that makes any sense. I will at least give credit. Like I said, there is a part of me that does kind of like the way he is, and with what they do with him, it's effective enough. But it does still feel like it doesn't go far enough with him. I feel like it would have been better if Venom and Eddie had a confrontation with Null. Maybe never actually fought him, but actually saw him and realized the grandiosity of just how powerful this guy was, and that in a fair fight they'd be supremely outclassed. Now the thing is, I understood that Venom and Eddie probably wouldn't end up clashing with Null in the movie, as even the filmmakers admitted that they didn't want to have Null be a player yet until a later movie, which I get. I do understand that. It's like if they had thrown Thanos in at an earlier point in the MCU. It just wouldn't have had as much kick. And part of what made Thanos work, in my opinion, was how much they built him up throughout the MCU. So I feel like if they just threw Null in and said, okay, he's the bad guy now, and had Venom beat him, even though Venom, even by symbiote standards, is kind of low on the totem pole, yeah, it probably wouldn't have gone well. I can get that. It's just that, again, because he's put in the background so much, it feels like that there's a bit of wasted potential with him. And to kind of compare him to another big bad that sadly didn't get off his feet, let's talk Darkseid from the Snyder Cut of the Justice League. Like with Null in this movie, Darkseid in the Snyder Cut of the Justice League was built up as the de facto big bad, the man behind the man, the guy who basically, if he was allowed to come to Earth, he would ruin everybody in his plan for conquest. And they built him up really damn well in that movie. But the thing is, what made that film work was that while he was considered the bigger bad, we still had a regular big bad in the form of Steppenwolf, who was trying to gather the mother boxes so he could eventually take over the Earth and allow Darkseid to come in and, ruin the place and get the anti-life equation. And likewise, we were shown the consequence of what could happen if Darkseid ever came to Earth, and the Justice League at one point in the movie did come face to face with him. They saw him, they pretty much just gave him the head of his former general, and pretty much told him, stay the hell away. This is our turf. We don't want you anywhere near here. Which resulted in Darkseid, pissed off, turning away and promising to come back in full. Which, of course, he never did, because that particular film franchise is dead in the water. But hey, it was effective. I'll give you that. But in the case of Null, though, there is no other big bad than him. He's the guy in charge of the Xenophage. And I give credit where it's due. The Xenophage are effectively creepy, as these are monsters that will hone in on Venom should he ever fully show himself. And I think that can work. And the way they show how they can battle it out with a symbiote by just literally taking them and their host, stuffing them in their mouth, and then turning them into dust, which they expel at the back of their head. I like it. It works. It's just that, again, because Null is basically relegated to the background and there is no other big bad than him, it also feels like he's a little wasted. Again, just a little bit. This is a more heavy-handed criticism, I openly admit. And when it comes down to it, like I said, on a second viewing, I do appreciate what they did more with Null. It's not perfect, I will not deny, but even the beginning with him feels a little too clunky as an exposition, as literally the film opens with him in his prison as he exposits what the hell happened to him, and that that he needs the codex if he ever wants to escape from his prison. But at the end of the day, it just feels like they could have done a little bit better with him. I'm not saying have him fight Venom right away, but at the very least, I feel like it would have been a little bit better if we had seen a bit more with him beyond the Xenophage. It's actually kind of give another example. The MCU, I think, did a better job of building up Thanos, because even before we met Thanos, we already got an idea of just how much of a threat he was, since he was the one that bankrolled Loki's invasion of Earth. And while Null is shown to be very powerful, his weapons are still the Xenophage, and we're shown just how dangerous they are. But even then, they're not really a conquering army. They're just, well, monstrous aliens. Which, again, I'm not trying to say that to downplay the Xenophage. They're effective as minions go, and like I said, these things are not creatures you want to trifle with, and even if you blow them up, they will get back up. So, again, it's a bit more heavy-handed in that criticism, and as a result, it's just like I said, I feel like Null could have had more to him in the build-up for the movie. And while on second viewing I appreciate him more, and I would love to see more with him in later movies if it ever gets to that point, again, for what we have, I feel like they could have done a little bit better. Just a little. Again, not saying it's stuff with him is bad, just could have needed more to it. Sadly, missed opportunity is not the only problem I have with the movie. Another problem I have with it, tonal dissonance. The thing is, like with all the other Venom movies, Last Dance does kind of have a bit of a quirky side to it, mostly in the form of Eddie and Venom's relationship. And to give a compliment to the movie, their relationship is still one of the best parts of the movie. The problem is that we are dealing with what is literally supposed to be an apocalyptic threat in the form of Null, and yet Eddie and Venom are just treating this all like it's just a road trip, a buddy cop romp, and so forth. And as a result, a lot of the scenes with them where they're just being weird with each other and making jokes with one another, It kind of feels like it clashes with some of the more serious moments in the movie. To give an example, but right before the third act, we see Venom go up to Mrs. Chen's apartment and then just start dancing with her in this choreographed dance, which even Eddie questions how he and Mrs. Chen how he and Mrs. Chen choreographed that whole thing. While we have the military actively tracking Venom because they want to stop Null from getting the Codex too. And likewise, we see the Xenophage closing in on Venom, and it just, I don't know, the two scenes just kind of clash. Same goes for Martin and his family. They are a side plot in the movie that unfortunately feels more like a distraction than anything. I won't call them entirely bad for reasons I'll get to when I talk about the positives of the movie, but it feels like their whole role in the movie is just to kind of be a slight comic relief because Martin's just an alien chaser who just wants to see Area 51, and the stuff with him feels just kind of offbeat and just feels like it's taking away from the stuff we should be focusing on. And as a result, because of all of this, it leads to a lot of clashing styles in the movie, which does sadly take you out of it. And to kind of give another example, sorry, I'm going my notes into it, and there is something I wanted to bring up. So, I kind of give another example for me. Let's talk about Dr. Payne. I didn't care for her. I felt that her acting was a little stilted in the movie, and as a character, sadly, I found her to be kind of annoying. The thing is, Dr. Payne, I don't really get her. She's just sort of an annoyance, to put it bluntly. She feels like she fills the role of Carlton Drake, but from the first Venom movie, whereas Carlton Drake seemed to have the gift of gab, and was at least a somewhat interesting villain because of how he could easily bend people with just a few words, she feels like this is a lady that almost feels sociopathic in a different degree, as she is more concerned with the symbiotes than the welfare of everybody else, which I don't really understand. I think it's because the idea is that she's supposed to dive into her work and she gets so invested in the sciences of things that she really doesn't seem to understand tone or motions and all that stuff, but at the same time, this is a lady that when she hears that a bunch of soldiers were killed by this monster, her first response is, "Did you get any samples of it?" Even though the general in charge is kind of justifiably freaking the fuck out because he just saw a monster that was not part of this, that they were not informed about before, just tear through his men right after he was told that there was another bigger threat out there that wants to kill them all. So I don't know. It just kind of feels weird. But and what makes it worse, in my opinion, is that the film seems to want to justify her. I'm not even kidding. The very first scene we see with her is that apparently is a flashback where when she and her twin brother were kids, they were out in the middle of a lightning storm, and while they were trying to get out of while they tried to go run for cover when a lightning strike came for them, well, unfortunately, the lightning strike wound up hitting Dr. Payne, but instead of killing her, it went right through her body and down her arm and wound up shocking her twin brother instead. As a result, she's got a scar on her body from where the lightning hit her, and now she's down one brother. And part of the reason she dived so much into her research is because what she's doing here was her brother's dream, and she wants to kind of use it to, carry on his memory, so to speak. But the problem is, again, she's kind of sociopathic. I'm not saying that she's evil per se, but she genuinely just seems more interested in the aliens that she has, that the Area 55 has under the lock and key, than the people in charge of them. It's similar to Carlton Drake, but whereas Carlton Drake was shown as the villain in the first Venom movie, where it feels like we're supposed to sympathize with this lady because she's put in contrast with General Strickland, who is somewhat put in the same grumpy, angry, I don't understand this stuff, army stereotype that you would expect. But the difference is that you end up siding more with General Strickland because a lot of the reasons why he's so grumpy and angry are somewhat justifiable. Yes, he's paranoid about the symbiotes that just want safe haven. But considering the track record of symbiotes in the previous Venom movies, do you blame him? In every one of the previous Venom movies, the symbiotes have only come to Earth not because they want to make friends with people. No. They want to use us up. In the first movie, Riot and his band of symbiotes came to Earth with the express purpose of scouting the place out, going back to their home world, and then bringing as many other symbiotes as they can back to Earth so they can use up the population. And then likewise in Let There Be Carnage, we were introduced to a symbiote that was the spawn of Venom, who was already kind of nuts, and a literal serial killer. And Carnage's intent was to kill his father to wipe out the competition, and then literally just destroy as many things as he could, just because he could. So again, not exactly a good track record. And now here we have this third movie, in this movie, with this whole other band of symbiotes, and they say that they only came to Earth because they were running from Null, that they just came to Earth because they wanted safe haven, and that they want to help everybody, and they end up joining in the final battle to fight off the xenophage and all that crap. And I'm sorry, I don't fully buy it. Like, I can understand. Not all symbiotes are probably bad. After all, Venom turned over a new leaf, and even throughout the movie, he admits that he does like living on Earth and living with Eddie. But again, considering the track record of previous symbiotes throughout the movies, it just kind of feels weird to some. I can understand why General Strickland would be as paranoid as he was, because he's right to be paranoid. And again, I'm not saying that it's. I won't say that it's out of the ballpark to say that there are symbiotes that don't want to hunt and harvest people, because you know what? People are people no matter where you go. Some are good, some are bad. And it's probably a similar case with the symbiotes. So I can buy there's maybe like some symbiotes out there that do genuinely just want to live with the host and really have to just survive off of what they can just to ensure they don't go full bite everyone's heads off and use up the host while we can kind of dealy. But again, so I can at least buy that. But again, considering the track record of the previous films, I don't blame General Strickland for being as paranoid as he is. And then likewise, when he hears about the threat of Null and what that Null could be an even bigger problem than just a group of symbiotes that came to Earth because they want to use us all up. Again, I feel like he's justified. And him basically just shoving Dr. Payne out of the leadership of Area 55 so that he can be in charge, I understand why he's doing it. Dr. Payne is clearly biased when it comes to the symbiotes, and when she hears about the threat of Null, she doesn't want to stop Null from getting the Codex. No. She wants to study the symbiotes more. She wants to get Venom and see what makes him tick. She doesn't give a shit if there's a threat of this almost godlike monstrosity coming to Earth. No. Science requires sacrifice after all, and this is just the sacrifice they ought to make, which even her assistant calls her out on. It's bullshit. I don't care for it. And by the end, it feels like that we're supposed to side with her somewhat, but I don't. I think this bitch is cray-cray. I think that she really is just so emotionally detached from everything around her that she really can't see the forest through the trees. I don't know, it just kind of feels weird. And I found myself honestly just siding more with General Strickland throughout the whole movie. Because, yeah, he does get gruff and angry, and he does make it personal when Venom ends up killing one of his men, but at the end of the day, this is a guy who is rightfully paranoid about a race of species who are pretty much parasites who in their previous attempts to come to Earth were to use up hosts for their own survival. And then he learns that there's this greater threat on the horizon that wants to end them all, and yet he has to work for the lady that says, oh, just let it all be. Again, I side more with him than with Dr. Payne. So again, kind of a weird thing. Now, to be fair, maybe we weren't supposed to entirely side with Dr. Payne, as going back to that scene with her assistant who talked to the scientist and who asked the scientist if she talked to her family somewhat at some point. I can feel like there were times when Dr. Payne was rightfully called out on her BS, but they don't happen very often, and it gets to the point where it feels like you're supposed the film wants you to side with Dr. Payne, but sadly you don't. Although I will give credit where it's due. Her getting that lightning symbiote at the end of the movie was fucking awesome. I can rag on Dr. Payne all she wants, but it's a lightning symbiote. It has hair that seems to hurch back, and it's all purple that's jutting with lightning. Even when she desuits, there's still little lightning tingles on her hand. It looks fucking awesome. I dig it. So I'll give her that, but otherwise, not really a fun supporting character. And and as a result, it does feel like that does kind of feels weird to me. But With all that out of the way, what makes me like this movie? Well, for starters, like I said, Venom and Eddie's relationship. Like with the previous two movies, their dynamic is still absolutely fun. I love their little buddy cop banter. They're still, and it's still fun to see them go at it throughout the whole movie. The Eddie calling Venom out on his shit, Venom trying to just justify it all while still being a complete goofball. Venom going silly when he needs to, while Eddie's trying to be serious, or Eddie getting angry at Venom and Eddie and Venom trying to calm him down. It's actually pretty nice and funny. And one scene that I think genuinely kind of helped showcase their dynamic at its best was the opening fight scene where Eddie and Venom fought the guys that had all these dogs locked away for dog fighting. And what makes the scene so honestly cool is the fact that throughout the whole fight, Eddie and Venom are almost in complete sync. It's not like Venom's in the driver's seat and is forcing Eddie to do all this. It feels like the two of them are actually working together as proper partners. As at some points, Venom ends up desuiting and just lets most of his tendrils do the work, while Eddie has to just kind of fight on his own, using whatever weapons he can. And what makes it better is that both Eddie and Venom are both just making quips throughout the movie, or throughout the scene. As it's not just one or the other in control here. They're both clearly having fun just fucking with these guys before they eventually take them down and eat their heads. It's kind of fun, and it even ends with a genuinely funny scene where they have these guys on standby. One asks, "Who are you?" And Eddie tries to do the "We are Venom" thing from the end of the first movie, but he and Venom get their timing off and they can't quite get it right. So I find that, which I thought was funny. I liked it. And throughout the movie, their dynamic is still some of the best parts and does make for some genuinely entertaining scenes. But what also works, in my opinion, is that there are still a handful of emotional moments throughout the movie. They don't show up as often as I would have liked, but when they do come in, they're actually pretty damn effective at showcasing Venom and Eddie's relationship and how this movie is their final outing together. The thing is, from the instant that Venom says that the Codex can only exist as long as he or Eddie exist, well, it makes it clear that the only way to stop Null is probably for one of them to die, which at first neither of them wants to happen. But as the film goes along, the writing on the wall becomes a lot clearer, and as a result, a sacrifice has to be made. And throughout the movie, it feels like Eddie and Venom are fully aware that this is where things are going to end up, but they don't want to face the music just yet. It's clear that they do want to spend more time together. Venom is still very protective of Eddie and wants to help him out wherever he can, even at the risk of his own life. And there are several moments in the movie where they just kind of have quiet moments, or not really a lot of moments, but there are a couple moments here and there where they're just talking. Like going back to the scene where Eddie was riding with Martin's family as they're singing Major Tom. Venom just quietly tells Eddie that, yeah, this is something that he would have liked to have with Eddie. And likewise, when Eddie talks to Martin's son and tries to calm him down by saying there's no such thing as aliens, even Venom's like, "You would have made a good dad, Eddie." It's clear that there's a bit of longing in his voice. Like Venom is talking about these things as if they're never going to happen, because he probably knows that they probably will never happen. And likewise, in an earlier scene before Eddie met up with Venom, Venom talked about how he and Eddie have been down many roads together, and Eddie mentions how there probably aren't a lot more roads left. It's clear that both Eddie and Venom are aware that they're probably not going to survive to the end of this movie. And yet they still keep going. They still keep up with the regular dynamic. They still spend time together. They still just goof off with one another. It's nice. And combined with these quiet moments, it becomes increasingly clear that they know that they probably are going to be that this is probably the last time these moments, these days, these hours are probably the last that they'll have together. And so they're just going to try and make the most of it as best as they can. They help each other out. The scene when Venom and Eddie finally realize that in order to stop Null, that one of them has to die, it's very heartbreaking, as Venom just pulls Eddie aside and talks about how he wished he could have seen Lady Liberty. Eddie talks about how once they get out of this, they'll go see, but even Venom lets him know, we're not going to get out of this. They're not going to stop unless they have the Codex, and we know there's only one way that'll happen. And so Eddie and Venom just kind of agree that they have to do this. And nice. It's sad sad. And when Venom finally sacrifices himself to stop Null from getting the Codex, it's genuinely sad. Made worse when he puts Eddie behind a blast shield and just tells him this is only goodbye for now. It's really sad. It's a good way of echoing Martin's story too. So what Martin said to him earlier. I mean, so I like that. And combine that with Eddie and Venom's normal dynamic, it makes for a good emotional core to the movie. So I think that that's something that really does help along and keep everything going. Then of course, like I said, Null, while I still feel was underutilized, I think does the job well enough that you still kind of get a sense of how much of a threat he is, and he is creepy enough to at least make you disturbed by him. The Xenophage as threats genuinely do work, even if I would just still put him in the Mook class, though as Mooks go, they're very, very effective. And likewise, the action scenes are just really damn awesome. When it comes down to it, what really helps to make the film work is, I think, the action, the comedy, especially with Eddie and Venom's dynamic, the relationship they build up throughout the movie, and the action. And yeah, the action is awesome, taking full advantage of what they have to really kind of go all out with it. Like we see Venom, while Venom has to spend most of the movie inside of Eddie, which sounds dirty when I say it out loud, he still isn't bereft of weapons and so forth, and is able to use whatever powers he can to help out. We see him while he can't fully suit up with Eddie, he can fully suit up with other people since the Codex isn't created from them, and so we see him bond with a Venomized horse or just with a horse. I see him bonding with other animals. We see him make a little merman tail for Eddie so he can get out of the river rapids. We see him suck in all the Xenophage monsters into him, which almost gives him a Xenophage body when all of them are grouped together inside of his massive form, which looks really damn awesome. The climax with all the symbiotes being released to fight the Xenophage is genuinely fucking cool. And like I said, the opening fight scene, just fun times all around. When it comes down to it, the thing with Venom The Last Dance, while I feel like it does have its problems, what makes the film work is just, one, its main characters, its action, its creativity in those regards, the humor, and even the bit of the emotional core. Yeah, basically, while the film itself is flawed in many aspects that do kind of get to me, like there's the tonal dissonance, which I think doesn't work, which I think does kind of hamper it. Quite a few missed opportunities that I think the film could have gone down that really would have made it better. And yes, sadly, some of the side characters being annoying as hell. I can't bring myself to hate it. Quite frankly, while I'm not going to say this film is great by any means, it is still a fun ride from beginning to end. We have, like I said, the chemistry of the main characters is great. The action stuff is nice. The villains, while I feel it could have had more to them, I think were good enough in what they had. The emotional ones I think really hit home, and overall, I do kind of like it. Although if I had to list another problem with the movie, I think Martin and his family were a bit unnecessary. The only thing that really contributed to the plot was to give Venom a bit of sense of forlonging when he realized that this is the life that he and Eddie would never have. So I get again that part. So again, mixed bag, but mostly for the most part, I think Martin's family could have been cut out and replaced with other things, and they would have been better, and still would have. And they think that they would have been better, but. Again, on the whole, Venom The Last Dance, while not a perfect movie by any means and still having its fair share of problems, overall I think it's just a fun ride from beginning to end. If you've seen the film once and just kind of roll your eyes at it, I say give it a second viewing, because there are things in there that I do think make it worth watching. Is it great? No, not at all. In fact, I can honestly say I don't think any of the Venom movies are great. But for what they all are, all of them are fun rides from beginning to end that take advantage of what their main characters can do, just go nuts with it, and just try and have a fun time while doing it. And The Last Dance is no exception. Is it as good as the other Venom movies? Nah. I think maybe it's tied with the first one in terms of quality, maybe a little bit under, but overall, I still think, like I said, it's just a fun ride from beginning to end, and does at least lay down the groundwork for any future films that may or may not come to pass should these films be successful enough. So, there you go. What can you do? Overall, like I said, flawed movie, but still enjoyable enough in its own regards. So, yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. I thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and while next week we go back to Xiaolin Showdown, the next time we venture back into the Sony side of the MCU, we are hopefully once again going to check in on Kraven the Hunter. Unless the film gets delayed again, in which case, fuck, I don't know what we're looking at next. But till then, I hope you have a good evening and take care.